January 897 AD, Rome. Inside the Basilica of St. John Lateran, a pope sits on the throne of St. Peter dressed in full papal vestments, crowned, robed, ready to answer for his crimes. There's only one problem. He has been dead for 9 months. This is not a rumor. This is not a legend whispered by later chroniclers with an axe to grind. This actually happened. A corpse exhumed from its grave, propped upright on the papal throne, put on trial for its life, or what was left of it. They called it the Synodus Horrenda. History remembers it as the Cadaver Synod. To understand why a dead man was made to stand trial, you have to understand the man they put in that throne, Pope Formosus. He wore the papal ring from 891 to 896 in an Italy where Rome had no army of its own, and the papacy itself was a prize fought over by rival warlords. His troubles went back further still. In 876, Pope John VIII excommunicated Formosus, accusing him of conspiring to usurp the papacy and inciting Bulgarian bishops to defy Rome's authority. Formosus fled into exile in Lombardy rather than face the consequences. It took until 883, under Pope Marinus I, for that excommunication to finally be lifted. He returned to Rome, rebuilt his standing, and in 891 this once-exiled, once-excommunicated bishop became Pope himself. But in the collapsing world of the late Carolingian Empire, old enemies never really forgot, and forgiveness was never permanent. Formosus inherited a poisoned chalice, and Italy splitting apart in a tug-of-war over the imperial crown. In 892, he crowned Lambert of Spoleto, son of the powerful Guy III of Spoleto, as co-emperor, bowing to the Spoltan faction that dominated central Italy at the time. But Formosus wanted Rome free of Spoltan control, so he pivoted and invited Arnulf of Carinthia, king of East Francia, to march his army into Italy and break Spoleto's grip on the city. In 896, Formosus personally crowned Arnulf emperor inside Rome. It should have settled the question of power for a generation. Instead, Arnulf was struck down by paralysis before he could move against Spoleto, and was forced to retreat back across the Alps into Germany, leaving Rome, and Formosus's legacy, completely exposed to Spoltan revenge. Formosus died in April 896. His immediate successor, Boniface VI, lasted barely 2 weeks. Then came Stephen VI, installed with the backing of the Spoltan faction, Lambert and his mother, the formidable Empress Ageltrude. Their interests were simple. Formosus had crowned their rival. That needed to be erased retroactively, absolutely, and publicly. So in January 897, on Stephen's orders, Formosus's grave was opened. 9 months in the ground. The corpse was lifted out, dressed once more in the full vestments of the papacy, and carried into the Lateran Basilica. There, before a council of bishops, it was seated upright on the papal throne to stand trial for its own papacy. A deacon was assigned to speak in the corpse's defense. By most accounts, he said almost nothing. Stephen VI did the talking, leaning toward the rotting body and demanding answers it could never give. "Being Bishop of Porto," he reportedly snarled, "why did you, with great ambition, usurp this see of the apostle?" The charges piled up. Perjury, illegally transferring from one bishopric to another in violation of canon law, holding more than one see at once. Every question met the same silence. Every silence was read as guilt. And then, according to several accounts, the earth itself seemed to answer. An earthquake shook the basilica mid-trial, cracking part of the building. In a more superstitious age, it might have been read as divine fury, a warning to stop. Stephen did not stop. The tribunal pressed on and delivered its verdict, guilty on every count. Formosus's papacy was annulled retroactively. Every ordination, every decree erased as if it had never happened. The corpse was stripped of its papal vestments and dressed instead in the plain clothes of a layman. Then came the mutilation. The 3 fingers of the right hand, the fingers Formosus had used to bless, to consecrate, to ordain, were hacked from the body. What remained was dragged out and thrown into the Tiber River. The river was not the end of the story. The corpse, according to the chronicles, became entangled in a fisherman's net and washed up on the bank. It was carried into a nearby church, and there, the contemporary chronicler Liutprand of Cremona claimed, statues of the saints seemed to bow, to salute the broken body as it passed. Whether that detail is pious legend or eyewitness memory, we can't fully know. Liutprand was a vivid, opinionated writer, not a neutral one. But true or not, the story spread through Rome like fire, and it turned the mood of the city against the man who had ordered the trial. By summer, Rome had had enough. A popular uprising rose against Stephen VI. He was seized, stripped of his office, and thrown into prison. Sometime in July or August of 897, barely a year into his papacy, he was strangled to death behind bars. The man who put a corpse on trial for usurping power did not outlive his victim by much more than a season. The reversal came fast. In December 897, Pope Theodore II convened a new synod that annulled the Cadaver Synod's verdict entirely, rehabilitated Formosus's name and priesthood, and ordered his recovered body reburied in full pontifical vestments inside St. Peter's Basilica, the honor his corpse had been denied months earlier. The following year, Pope John IX went even further, holding two separate synods that formally condemned the entire affair and banned, outright, any future trial of the dead. By 898, it must have seemed like the horror was finally over. A dead man had been dug up, judged, and mutilated for the sins of the living. The Church had recoiled in disgust. The law now forbade this from ever happening again. It didn't hold. In 904, Pope Sergius III took the papal throne and reopened the case. He had Formosus condemned a second time, praised Stephen VI's original trial as righteous, and according to several later sources, had the body dug up once more, this time beheaded. The ban meant to end this story couldn't survive contact with Rome's factional politics for even a decade. Historians have a name for this stretch of the papacy: the Saeculum Obscurum, the Dark Age, sometimes bluntly called the Pornocracy, decades of short reigns, murdered popes, and naked political interference in the seat of St. Peter. The Cadaver Synod remains its most infamous symbol. It was a moment when the machinery of empire and faction reached past the grave itself, because even death could not settle who truly held power in Rome. More than 11 centuries later, it stands as one of the strangest trials ever conducted anywhere. The only known moment in history when a corpse was seated on a throne to answer, in front of the men who ruled the Church, for the sins of the living who once wore its power.